I want to thank everybody for joining us for today's live webinar hosted by Astrix and sponsored by Astrix, and it's entitled Solving Technical Challenges of Transitioning from On-Premises Server to Cloud Services for Empower 3 CDS. Today's presentation is going to be hosted by Marcelo Suarez with Astrix. I'll introduce him in just a moment. We go to the next slide, Marcelo. And before we get into the content today, I'll take a few minutes to explain a little bit about who Astrix is, in case you haven't had the pleasure of joining us for any of our webinars that we do. We do them fairly regularly, 1, 2, sometimes 3 a month, again, on a wide array of topics. Some of them are related to a specific vendor. We can go back one slide, please. Some of them be related to a specific vendor like today, or some of them could be more broad-based topics. So who we are, well, for over 25 years, we have a very unique breadth of highly specialized services, processes, and technology that we bring to bear, predominantly in the life sciences industry, and it's enabled Astrix to be a leading partner in transforming the way science-based businesses succeed. A couple of fast facts about the company. We were established in 1995. We work with a wide array of vendors, as you'll hear from one today, but we are platform agnostic. We're not aligned to vendors, so we don't get rewarded by recommending vendors in any way. We operate from locations in the United States and overseas, and we have about 1,200 employees. The cool thing for us that we like to talk about is that greater than 90% of those team members hold advanced science degrees. We are a science-based company that helps science-based companies, and we are headquartered in beautiful Red Bank, New Jersey. The type of customers we help, everywhere from startups to Fortune 1000. There is no size limitations for us in size of company. We predominantly work within life science enterprises, but we also support chemical, CPG, government agencies, and research institutions. Generally speaking, those organizations that have R&D departments and laboratories. We can go to the next slide, please. So we help those companies by bringing a very broad end-to-end service offering. We like to say we have services that accelerate digital transformation and optimize performance across your ecosystem. This is going to be everything from more strategic type services like strategic innovation, enterprise architecture. That's helping companies really define and understand everything from what their business process should look like, what their application roadmap should look like, what their data management and governance program should look like, through helping design what the application architecture, kind of their technology stack should look like. And of course, we are oftentimes getting involved in projects like the ones that will be discussed today, which is helping folks get from desktop to cloud. And then at Solution Selection Services, we'll help folks pick the right combination of solutions to meet those needs. From there, we can do development and implementation of those solutions. Once we complete that, we can get into the whole world of computer systems validation, making sure that those systems are in line with FDA guidance and regulations. From there, we can provide a slew of ongoing application support and even go as far as staffing your organization with both the technical experts as well as direct staffing of your laboratory or your R&D group through our staffing services. So again, a pretty broad array of services that we bring to bear. That's enough about us. Let's go ahead and get into today's presentation materials. I'll take a moment and introduce our speaker for today, Marcelo Suarez. He's a delivery manager here in the Lab Informatics Services Division at Astrix. He brings 16 years of experience in lab informatics, as well as analytical instrumentation, with a scope of work ranging from Empower, New Genesis implementations, training and support of third-party systems interfaces. He has experience in projects of different variations, everything from system best practices, system architecture, configurations, data integrity assessments, and computer systems validation. So it's a pleasure, Marcelo, to be doing a webinar with you again. I'll turn the controls over to you, and I'll come back on at the end to help with questions.
All right, thanks, Kevin, and thanks everybody for joining the call today. So again, the title of this presentation is Solving Technical Challenges of Transitioning from On-Premises Servers to Cloud Services for Empower 3 CDS. And the agenda for today's call is to discuss key aspects of moving your Empower 3 CDS implementation from your on-premise servers to the cloud, addressing a couple of common concerns, such as concerns around data security. What things should you consider about the security of your data within your system by moving from on-premises to the cloud? Or data migration. What can I prepare to have a smoother data migration? Because if you're moving from on-premises to the cloud, of course, for obvious reasons, you're going to need to move your data to somewhere else, right? So how to plan for this process. Integration with third-party systems. You may already have integrations running today on your premises services, and now you're moving to the cloud. So what is it with the integrations that you need to take care of? And also regulatory compliances. Not because you move to the cloud, you're free from FGA and CFR 21 Part 11, EMEA, and all that encompasses regulatory compliance. So we're also going to touch base on a couple of those points as well. But before we jump into the technical challenges themselves, let's do a quick overview on the scenario we're trying to speak here in this call, right? So first things first, what is Empower 3 to begin with? So it's a CDS, a chromatography data system platform developed by Waters Corporation. It is the market leader for CDS currently right now. It has been around for 20 plus years with many companies and users used to operate it. It's the same platform that has been running since it was called Millennium. And then Millennium became Empower 1, and then became Empower 2, and then became Empower 3. But if people operate in Millennium, they do have a good understanding of how to operate Empower itself. So it's a tool that has been going for a long time in the market. Depending on company's market, chromatography can be responsible for the vast majority of the data you generate, something like even 90% of your data, especially for companies like pharma companies, oil and cosmetics. They rely heavily on liquid or gas chromatography. So it's a technique that has a huge impact on the lab operations. So because of that, it's a critical application on financial, business continuity, and regulatory compliance matters because of the sheer amount of data from the lab that relies on chromatography analysis. And also, if your network goes down, your business continuity can be severely affected. Right? Empower can be scalable from single desktop PCs all the way to global implementations, which is mostly the reason why you are all here, that you hear about, right? Larger, bigger implementations. A quick overview about moving to cloud. So why do people go through that route of moving their on-premises applications to cloud? The main reason, the vast majority of the cases, is cost, right? So you have least expenses on IT infrastructure because right now you don't need to buy the hardware to support your applications anymore, right? You don't need to buy the servers, the disks, processors, and put it all together and keep that up and running. So you ease the maintenance in the long run because you don't need to deal with the hardware aspects of your network as you did in the past for on-premises. And the hardware life cycle is no longer a concern to you. It's a concern for your cloud service provider, right? That also improves your cost predictability, right? So you have a monthly fee based on your agreement within your cloud service provider platform versus a big initial investment of buying your servers and putting it all together, right? And again, you have an additional layer of infrastructure support from the cloud provider, right? If you need more RAM to your server, if you need more cores to your processing, you reach your provider and they can set that up for you. So we are speaking about cloud service providers. What's out there to be used, right? So the three main players in the market right now are these three that you see on screen: Amazon Web Services, also known as AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure. Currently, Waters gives support to AWS and Azure. So they mentioned that in their release notes and their manuals for the newer versions of Empower. Right? In the past, Waters only gave support to Amazon specifically, and now they gave it a broader range to also include Azure. When it comes to implementing Empower on a cloud environment, typically we see two cases. So either the customer already has other applications running on the cloud. So I don't know, your SAP or other applications running on the cloud, your LIMS system. So in this case, financial aspects must be considered. So addition of another application such as Empower 3 to the same cloud may reduce your costs because you already have a contract with that cloud service provider. And the technical support team inside your company is already familiarized and trained on the cloud services. So you get a lot of synergy from moving Empower to the same vendor you already had tested before, right? The second case is customers that rely solely on on-premises servers and has a flexibility to choose for their specific site or location. So in this case, technical aspects can have an impact. Of course, financial is also important, but technical aspects are important to be considered as part of this process, right? A proper vendor assessment should be considered and recommended for proper determination of the cloud solutions that best fit your business requirements, right? Being able to make sure that your site on location A can reach and have low latency, have a good service to provide to you, and all of that. So you have the opportunity to do that assessment if you don't have a contract already. When it comes to cloud services on life science companies, so here's an extract that I took from the vendor pages. So I went to AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, looked for life sciences instances, and they do have individual articles, each and every one of them, speaking about their view of regulatory compliance in life science companies. And here are a couple of the logos mentioned by each and every vendor. So you can see a couple of the companies on the life sciences market that are already relying on cloud to provide service for them. So with that overview done on what is Empower, why are people moving to the cloud, and a couple of companies that are on that specific framework. So let's start discussing the technical challenges and their solutions. And the challenges that are not only related to the cloud itself, but on the Empower movement to the cloud. So you guys are going to see a couple of additions to the agenda itself to cover also general operations from Empower and things you need to consider beforehand. So when it comes to comparing an on-premise Empower implementation versus a cloud implementation, so typically on an Empower network, of course, this can be heavily expanded. You have what you see here on your left. You have a database server, you have your file server. Depending on the company size, they can be the same server, so database and application living on the same computer. But for larger companies, they're typically separated. And then you have your lace boxes, which are directly connected to your chromatographic systems, and the clients that can be on Windows or Citrix, even if the company has that. When you move Empower from on-premises to clouds, the structure is virtually the same. You still need your database, you still need your file server, you still need your lace, your clients, and so on. But not all of them go to the cloud. Not all of them can be virtualized. So for example, the lace itself, the lace is connected directly to the chromatographic system via a direct cable, typically an Ethernet cable or a bus lace cable, IEEE. So those still need to be on the bench, right next to the equipment, or as close as possible, maybe on a cabinet, but through a switch, but they need direct connection closer to the chromatographic system itself. So the lace boxes are still part of the configuration that need to be done locally on premises, right? We're going to touch a little bit more about the laces on a few slides down the road. So these are typically the pieces that are moved to the cloud. So the database server, the file server, clients can and cannot be moved to the cloud depending on how you plan to do this. So if you want to do Amazon workspaces, for example, you can do that. You can do also Azure virtual desktops. That's also doable. We've seen companies doing this. You can have computers on the lab bench, physical computers running against a cloud server for Empower. That's also doable. You can have Citrix also working as well. So the client position may vary depending on your company needs. With all that said, with the pieces moving to the cloud, so then what are a couple of the key aspects that need to be considered? So first one, data security. So when it comes to cloud implementations, not only Empower related, but any cloud implementation, cloud security is a shared responsibility. And by shared responsibility, there is a clear cut between who does what, right? So the cloud provider, either AWS or Azure, they are responsible for the security of the cloud, meaning they have to secure their data center locations, avoiding people breaking into the data centers, or physical protection of the data centers, adherence to high operation standards like ISO certifications, distributed data centers to avoid any disaster, and have a proper disaster recovery mechanism around. So the cloud provider is supposed to guarantee that your data center is going to be there when you need it. But the customer is responsible for the security in the cloud. It doesn't matter if AWS or Azure has all that level of security in ISO if you have, for example, users sharing passwords for your application you're running on the cloud, right? So that's what we mean with shared responsibility. So the customer is responsible for what's in their cloud. So application setup done properly, user accounts creation, having individuals uniquely identified properly, training your users to be able to operate the system as needed, and your periodic reviews of their audit trails and logs and everything else. So all the work that you have today, they are still the same as you move to the cloud. What you're minimizing is your infrastructure work that you're delegating to your cloud service provider. But all your concerns about compliance and unique identification of people, or electronic signatures, electronic records, that all still the same, and that's still your responsibility. And still on the data security conversation, thinking about the structure that I showed previously, so communication between laces and servers is still done between an on-premise equipment to a cloud server, right? So laces are constantly connected to the servers because they do real-time data send over during injections, right? The laces sit right next to the chromatographic system. So when you ask a system to run injections, the injections are captured through the lace, and the lace sends it over real-time to the server. So in the event the network goes down, as the lace is connected directly to the chromatographic system, it can do a data buffering. It can save the injections within the lace. So whenever the server is back, the lace just sends over the buffer to the server. It's used for contingency, right? And because of that, on typical operations, the laces do have a continuous connection between the lace and the cloud server. And because of that, as you can imagine, the traffic between your lace and your cloud server may happen through different ways. So one solution that you have to think about is your end-to-end encryption between on-prem and cloud environments. You have a couple of options between the vendors. One of them can be VPN. They do offer VPN options for you to connect to your laces to your server. And they also provide an option for direct connect. So it's different from a VPN. It's a dedicated link between your company and AWS that doesn't go through internet. So both of them have advantages and disadvantages, but you have to think about this when you are selecting your provider, right? So the VPN solution, it's cheaper and easier to implement than a direct connection, but your data flows through the public internet. So it's susceptible to fluctuations, for example, on the global internet. The direct connect is a direct connection between your environment and your virtual private cloud. It's more expensive, it's harder to implement, but you have the additional layer of not trafficking your data through the internet. So that gives you additional layer of security. So these are a couple of solutions that you had to think of when you are moving to the cloud, especially around laces. That is also applicable not only to laces, but to clients as well, depending on where your clients are resided, right? Speaking of data migration, so when it comes to Empower, especially for companies that have been operating Empower since Empower 1 or 2, and they have been upgrading their systems, depending on how data is organized within your company, an Empower instance can have thousands of projects, and really thousands. I've worked in projects in which I've seen like 7,000 projects on one Empower instance. So it can take a lot of time to move data from one instance of Empower to another. The typical way this is done is by doing a backup from your old Empower, moving that data over to the new server, and doing a restore of this. So if you don't plan ahead your move from your own premise to the cloud, the data migration itself can be the sole cause for your project to take longer to complete, because the backup from Empower takes a lot of time, especially depending on how you organize your data. If you're one of those companies that create one project with your product name, and then you've been injecting samples for that project for 5 years, your backup is going to take longer to complete because of that. But if you've done your homework and you organize your data in a way that it's broken into timeframes, let's say once a year you create new projects, you have an estimate on sizing, so it gets easier for you to organize yourself during migration. So with all of these considerations, so we can think about a couple of things, right? So when you're doing your migration to the cloud, you don't need all data on day one when you're going live to the cloud, right? You need that data that you're working today and maybe a couple of months down in the past, so you can push some templates from things you've done in the past. So you don't need all data on day one, but you do need all your data available, right? As a regulatory compliance and best practices, all your data should be readily available in case an auditor asks for it, right? So you don't need all your data on day one, but you need to know where it is located and it must be readily available at any moment when you're transitioning. So again, a proper data hierarchy helps determine a proper cutoff date. So if you know you have retention policies that ask you only need to have your last 2 years of data within your Empower, you can make a data migration plan that takes care of those last 2 years, and then you can take care later of the data that is older than that, for example. Also, depending on database size, manual backups may take weeks, and that's not an exaggeration. It may take weeks depending on the number of projects. So a couple of solutions when it comes to data migration. You can leverage a couple of tools to help you out within this process. So for example, you could use Genesis SDMS, which is a Waters product, or OpenLab ECM, which is the equivalent from the Agilent side. Those two platforms are SDMS platforms, and you can use that to do a data cleanup for you before migration. The advantage here is that these platforms, as they are automatic, they run 24/7. They can keep capturing data for weeks beforehand, before you actually have to move your data to a new cloud environment. That does automatically a double check on data accuracy. So you don't have to worry if you have the data that you have saved on your centralized location is the same data that was moved to the cloud, because that capture already does the double checking for you. And you can archive and delete data from your legacy Empower system. So think about this. Imagine if you had to do a migration by hand, doing a backup on Empower, saving on a network location, and restoring to the cloud. How can you guarantee that you moved all your projects from one place to another? It can be a little bit of a hassle, right, to do this. So it can be very time consuming doing that comparison. So one way you could do this, if you have, for example, Genesis SDMS working on your company, you can point out Genesis SDMS to do a capture of your system, do that comparison, and then activate your data management module on Genesis SDMS, which does a deletion based on retention policies. So in the long run, what you're going to see on your legacy Empower system is that your number of projects are going to decrease more and more and more times go by. So that will clean up your Empower from old legacy data while keeping a original truthful copy on your Genesis SDMS. And then when it comes the time to do the move to the cloud, you have a much smaller set of data to move from. Then you can do that manually because the number is going to be lower and the effort is lower as well. A second option, if you do have Genesis SDMS, like the package that Waters calls Power of 2, you could use your Genesis license within Empower and do an archive on delete. So on your old legacy system, you do a deletion of a project, and that will kick in archive on delete. So when you ask for a project to be deleted, that gets first archived in your Genesis and then deleted for Empower. So if you leverage those tools, at the end of the day, if your migration goes fine, you're gonna see your number of projects getting lower and lower and lower in the legacy system to the point that it's gonna be completely clean. So you're sure that your data is completely moved out. Or at maximum, you're gonna have 1 or 2 projects with integrity errors that you can investigate ad hoc. But your effort is much reduced based on this, right? So, but in order for this to work, you have to plan beforehand on how to do this. Have a proper data migration plan put together is key for a migration to go smoothly. Integration with third-party systems. So if you are running your Empower on-premise and now you're moving to the cloud and you have integrations, let's say with systems like your ERP, like SAP, or you have integrations with your LIMS system, like Simple Manager, LabVantage, StarLIMS, or ELNs like BioVia Workbook or Genesis LMS or SDMS, if those if these integrations are working today, chances are that you're going to need to make adjustments to your integrations when you're moving to the cloud, right? It's not the same connection anymore. You have to account for those differences if they're going to even work once you do the migration, right? So the key here is to do a good proof of concept and feasibility studies before you do the jump to the cloud, right? Because you may realize that by making this migration of Empower to the cloud, now for some reason your users, if your users need to type results manually on your LIMS system, that may take a huge amount of time on lab operations, which will impact your company financially. So you may consider things way beforehand so you can do your investments and apply technical knowledgeable resources to help you figure out how to do this properly, right? So what is the solution here? Again, planning beforehand. So a comprehensive business process mapping, which properly takes into consideration these multiple platforms and their impact on overall company operations. So a proper business process mapping will be able to map out the inputs and outputs of your process. So now your Empower is doing an output from the cloud to a different location. So how will that work in this new scenario where Empower is not on your premises anymore? So a good proper business process mapping done beforehand can help you out not falling into pitfalls of breaking the logic or breaking your business continuity while you're moving to the cloud. And concerns about regulatory compliance. So by reading the documentation around life sciences and regulatory compliance from all three vendors that I was mentioning before, they're categoric at the same language. So they mentioned that the effort around the regulatory compliance is virtually the same as on-premise services, right? You still need to make sure that people are uniquely identified, that they can make electronic signatures, that these electronic signatures are persistent, and that you did your proper validation of your system. All of that is still the same, regardless if it's on-premises or cloud. But there are things that regulatory agencies will look with more details by you moving to the cloud, just to make sure that you did your proper analysis of the risk from doing this movement, right? So a couple of things to consider, speaking on regulatory compliance point of view, when you're doing that move in terms of regulatory compliance. So clear definition on where data is located. Some countries and some specific markets have restrictions around where your data is saved. So for example, I don't know, maybe it could be you have patient information, and these patient information, for some reason, they cannot live outside of United States. They need to be located within United States. So having a clear definition on where data for a specific site is located on which data center from your AWS provider is important information that you need to have, and make sure that you have clear understanding on where your data lives. You need to know where your data is at all time. Another important point is clear definition of disaster recovery, business continuity, and data retention policies and procedures. So just because you left your database to the cloud services provider, and they do have some abilities to do replication of databases between multiple data centers, you also need to be available to rebuild your system from scratch, right? In case of a disaster recovery, if that's needed for any reasons. So a proper definition on where your things are located, how you access your provider if something goes south, who should be doing what and when in case of a disaster recovery, clear definition of responsibilities, answering times, all of that should be put in place to give you confidence on how to operate when something goes wrong, and to give confidence to the regulatory agencies that you have that fully understandable and defined. Last but not least, company with internal IT resource trained and knowledgeable on the cloud solutions platform being used. You still need to have access to your platforms to monitor your server, right? So having a team trained on the new platform is also an important thing to have. So these are a couple of things which involves cloud, Empower implemented on a cloud environment, right? But there are more things when it comes to implementing Empower on a cloud environment, or just doing the movement of changing instances of Empower, right? So all the slides shown before covered main challenges when migrating from on-premises to cloud, but that is not all, right? There are some additional tasks that you must need to consider when doing this transition to make sure that you have a successful implementation. So it's not necessarily a challenge related to the cloud, but on the way you implement this, it can have a huge impact on your overall project, right? To name a couple of them, qualification and validation. So a couple of key questions here when it comes to qualification and validation of your chromatographic systems and your software as well, right? So is the new cloud environment you're going to run on a new system, a new version of Empower? So some companies use the opportunity that they're doing a migration to the cloud to also do an upgrade of their Empower instance to a newer version, right? They may be running on a older feature release of Empower, and now they want to go to the latest and greatest. Just that movement of changing versions, you might need to do a risk assessment over the new platform, mainly reading out the release notes of the new version, understanding the impacts that has to your business, and then you need to do a proper testing of this, mainly validation, right? So consider your risk assessment for the new version of Empower. Are all systems supported by this new version? Whenever we're doing migrations from one version of Empower to another, mainly for the feature release versions or core releases from Waters, Waters uses those opportunities to end the support of some equipment, right? So for example, if you don't consider that beforehand and you're too down the road on versions of Empower, you have an older version of Empower, chances are that if you're moving to the latest and greatest, you may be losing control of some of your systems. So for example, you can see some numbers here, 486, which is an old UV detector from Waters, 996, which is a PDA detector, buzzlace cards. Waters doesn't produce any equipment anymore with buzzlace controls, and even the buzzlace cards inventory from Waters, I guess it's fully depleted right by now. So if you don't consider this beforehand, you may have unforeseen costs that will bite you after you're done with the cloud implementation, right? So mapping the inventory beforehand may prepare you for these unforeseen costs. So maybe your company has a conductivity detector from Waters, and that's the only one, because typically you don't have too many conductivity detectors. It's not an analysis that you do too much. But then during the migration of Empower, you lose control of that one equipment that you have. So now you see the issue, right? So are all my systems running on the same firmware version? So the thing with firmware version is as you're moving to a new implementation of Empower for multiple sites, multiple equipment may have been purchased on different points in time. So they may have different firmware versions across the board. So also some companies use that opportunity to leverage the version across multiple sites. The advantage here, in which I think it's important to have, is this opportunity is golden for you to reduce your validation effort when it comes to migrating your Empower instance, right? So if you can harmonize your firmware version, think about this. You can do a validation of site A and run PQ injections for one specific system with a UV detector with a specific firmware version. When you move to site B, you already have evidence that this system with this firmware version works on this version of Empower and this version of instrument control software. So you can leverage the test that was done for site 1 and drastically reduce the number of testings that you need to do for site number 2. So that opportunity is golden for you to do this. Last but not least, how many instances do I need to validate? That depends on the way you implement your system, right? By moving to the cloud, you may, for example, want to have each site with its own database, own file server, own number of places, their own licenses for Empower. Technically, that's okay. But the thing is, if you have multiple sites across the globe, the number of licenses that you're going to have to purchase from Waters are going to be very expensive, and you're going to have to keep multiple servers, right? So maybe not worth the trouble. And also, when it comes to validation, by having multiple servers, you may need to do a little bit more testing, like more IQs. You can leverage lots of stuff, right? If you do have the same version of Empower with the same conditions for the server, but you will still need to at least run some kind of IQ on all your instances, right? So you can see how the validation work expands a lot. Or for example, you can have your implementation on a cloud done per region. So I've worked on a couple of projects. Most likely what I see is a separation between having one regional hub in US, one regional hub in Europe, and one regional hub in Asia, typically Singapore. So 3 hubs. So the number of IQs that you need to do then is much more reduced. And the validation effort for the core functionalities of Empower can be severely reduced as well, because now instead of running multiple, you run 3 of them and a smaller package for all sites being brought over those hubs, right? So here are a couple of technical challenges and solutions on how to attack those things that are not necessarily related to cloud implementation, but the way you implement your things on the cloud may significantly change your project timeline. Another additional task is training. By moving to the cloud, you do need to pay attention to a couple of things when it comes to training, right? Some companies use the opportunity of moving Empower to the cloud to also onboard sites that are not using Empower. So they're using, I don't know, OpenLab CDS, ChemStation, Chromeleon, Atlas, Total Chrome, Turbo Chrome, you name it. So they use that opportunity to also onboard all sites under Empower. So you need to pay special attention on training users on sites that are not currently using Empower, mainly a good Empower user training process for them to get used to Empower. Empower has a steep learning curve to get used to it. Not impossible, but once people know to operate it, it's good. And cloud environment access training as well. You may have people used to have their own laptops with the client application installed on it. Now they have to log into a Amazon Workspace, to Azure Virtual Desktop, to a Citrix instance, you name it. So you may need to train people on how to access the system right now. And also training our IT resources around the cloud provider capabilities and service agreements, so they can know what to do when something is wrong with their environment, if they need to act on disaster recovery purposes, or need to ask for more RAM, more cores, and all of that. So having people internally train about this is key also for business continuity purposes. When it comes to Water's practices here at Astrix, here's a slide with a couple of things that we work when it comes to Astrix implementation, to Water's implementations. So we can work all the way from architecture technology, helping you determine your system functionalities, your high availability, hardware and software specification, bandwidth solutions, put it all together. We can work on Empower 3 services, basically all the way from collecting your user requirements specifications, doing your data integrity assessments, installing your systems, running IQ, OQs, PQs, running those protocols, creating validation summary reports, trace matrix, all of that. Trainings as well on any of the modules that come with Empower. Trainings on custom fields creation. We can create the custom fields for you as well. So beginning to end solution when it comes to Empower. And we also have services around Nogenesis. So namely Nogenesis STMS and LMS, we can help out determine capture of projects, for example, on your Empower, setting up your data management or rotation policies, or even doing integrations between Empower and Nogenesis LMS, for example, transferring data from your Empower analysis to your Nogenesis ELM templates. And we do have professionals around solution architects, developers, project managers, and you name it. And here are a couple of companies that we've been working in the past when it comes to Empower implementations. And that's it for the presentation from my end. Kevin, up to you.
Great, thank you, Marcelo. Thank you very much. Great presentation, awesome content, a lot of detail. Again, I want to reiterate to the folks that are on the call, you can ask as many questions as you want if you have any right now. I do want to point out a couple of things real quick. If you have questions about the practice around, you know, the way Marcelo described it, you can get answers to that by hitting the gentleman email listed here, Michael Zakowski. You can just email him at mzakowski@astrixinc.com. He's, or go through contact us on the website, and he'd be able to get you some additional information or questions answered about the work that we do with waters and that particular area of practice that we have. If you have questions, again, I want you to encourage you to go ahead and ask them. We'll go ahead and get the recording